On a stretch of marshy ground, where two channels of the River Lee diverge, one of the world's largest natural harbours opens to the Atlantic. Today, container ships and oil tankers glide past pharmaceutical plants and tech campuses. The water reflects glass towers and Victorian terraces. But 1400 years ago, this was wild wetland, and a solitary monk named Saint Finbarr built a monastery where the marsh was deepest. To bring Cork's past back to life across those 14 centuries, this video uses AI-generated visuals grounded in historical research. The reconstructions are interpretive. Small details may not be exact, but they let us walk streets that vanished long ago and see buildings no photograph ever captured. From that monastery on the bog, Cork became a Viking trading post, a walled medieval city paying protection money to Gaelic lords, an English outpost that earned the nickname Rebel City, a Georgian port shipping butter across Europe, and a flashpoint of Irish Revolution burned by British forces in 1920. Through plague, siege, famine and civil war, the city survived. This is Cork. Marsh to metropolis, monks to merchants to rebels. 14 centuries compressed into 14 minutes. In the year 606, a monk named Saint Finbarr arrived at a place no sensible builder would choose. Between two channels of the River Lee lay a stretch of waterlogged ground, unstable and prone to flooding. Solid land existed upstream and down, yet this was where he decided to stay. The decision puzzles historians still. Monasteries typically sought elevated positions, dry foundations, defensible terrain. Saint Finbarr chose the opposite. The marsh offered neither security nor comfort. What it did offer was isolation. In early Christian Ireland, remoteness held spiritual value. The Desert Fathers had withdrawn to wastelands. Irish monks found their wastelands in bogs and islands. Saint Finbarr built his monastery on this unpromising ground. Timber structures rose on wooden pilings driven through peat into firmer sediment below. The channels of the Lee provided natural boundaries, limiting access, creating a threshold between the secular world and sacred space. Water surrounded the community, bells carried across its surface. The site became known by its defining characteristic. The Irish word for marsh is Cork, the place where the saint chose the marsh. The monastery served as a school and scriptorium. Monks copied manuscripts, taught students, tended gardens on reclaimed patches of drier ground. The community remained small, perhaps a few dozen souls at most. No grand stone church rose here in those early centuries. This was not Clonmacnoise or Glendalough, but it endured. Saint Finbarr died sometime in the mid-7th century. His burial site became a place of pilgrimage. The monastery continued under successive abbots training clergy, maintaining the liturgical round, surviving Viking raids that swept the Irish coast from the late 8th century onward. When Scandinavian longships appeared in the estuary around 915, they found a functioning ecclesiastical community on ground that still flooded with winter rains. The Vikings would recognise what Saint Finbarr perhaps intuited 3 centuries before. A marsh between river channels sits at a convergence. Water flowing from the interior meets tidal access to the sea. Poor ground for farming. Excellent ground for exchange. The saint had chosen a threshold. The Norsemen would build a port on it. The marsh would become a city, its foundations still resting on the soft ground where a monk once decided to stay. The dragon-prowed ships appeared on the Lee around 915. Norse warriors, yes, but not the raiders of legend. These were traders, merchants who saw what others missed, a protected harbour, fresh water, and an established settlement that could become something more. Between 915 and 922 they built their long fort where the two channels met. A ship fortress, half defensive position, half commercial depot. Timber walls rose from the marsh, wharves extended into deeper water. The settlement that had been purely monastic for 3 centuries transformed into something Cork had never been, a port. The monks did not flee. They watched as Norse carpenters shaped oak with techniques Saint Finbarr's followers had never mastered. They listened to languages from Scandinavia, from trading posts across the North Atlantic. And gradually, an arrangement emerged that neither conquest nor treaty could have forged. The Norsemen needed fresh water, grain, local knowledge of tides and channels. The monastery needed goods that Irish traders could not provide: Baltic amber, Frankish metalwork, tools forged in workshops 1,000 miles away. More valuable still, the long fort offered something no prayer could guarantee: protection. Gaelic lords who might have raided an isolated monastery thought twice before attacking a settlement defended by Norse warriors. Two communities occupied the same marshy ground. The monastery continued its rhythms, prayers at fixed hours, manuscripts copied in quiet cells, pilgrims arriving to venerate St. Finbarr's relics. 100 paces away, merchants weighed silver, haggled over furs, loaded oak barrels onto vessels bound for Iceland, for the Hebrides, for trading stations the monks knew only as names. Cork became a node in the great Scandinavian trade network that stretched from Byzantium to Greenland. Ships that had visited Dublin called here. Captains who knew the fjords of Norway knew the channels of the Lee. The settlement grew more urban, more complex. Workshops appeared. Permanent dwellings replaced temporary shelters. What had been a cluster of monastic buildings surrounded by marshland became something recognisably a town. This was not the violent subjugation chronicled in other Irish settlements. Cork developed a dual character, ecclesiastical and commercial, Gaelic and Norse, a place where monks and merchants inhabited overlapping worlds without erasing each other. The Irish who lived here learned Norse trading practices. The Norse learned Irish, took Irish wives, buried their dead according to Christian rites. For 2.5 centuries this arrangement held. The monastery endured, the long fort prospered, and Cork, built on a negotiation rather than conquest, developed an identity distinct from the purely Gaelic territories that surrounded it. The marsh had become a harbour. The harbour had become a crossroads. In 1185, Prince John, Lord of Ireland, put his seal to a document that would define this city for 3 centuries. The charter granted to the settlement at the marsh wasn't merely legal recognition. It was a declaration of permanence in hostile territory. Stone by stone, the walls rose. Not the romantic ruins tourists photograph today, but functional fortifications enclosing roughly 200 acres of reclaimed marsh. Limestone blocks quarried upstream, mortared thick enough to withstand siege engines. Gates at strategic points, each one barred and guarded. The North Gate, the South Gate, the Water Gate where ships unloaded under watchful eyes. Medieval builders understood what modern visitors often miss. These walls weren't keeping Cork in, they were keeping Ireland out. Beyond the fortifications stretched a countryside that had never stopped being Irish. Gaelic lordships controlled the river valleys, the pastures, the forests where wolves still hunted. The McCarthys to the west, the O'Sullivans to the south, ancient lineages who'd ruled here long before any Norman boot touched Irish soil and who had no intention of forgetting it. Cork existed as an island of Old English culture in an ocean of Gaelic custom. Inside the walls, merchants spoke Norman French and English. They wrote contracts in Latin. They built in stone according to continental fashion. 12 to 15 wealthy families controlled municipal government, their fortunes tied to ships that sailed for Bordeaux, Bruges, La Rochelle. Wool went out, hides went out, salt came in, iron came in, wine came in. The population numbered about 2,100 souls, packed into narrow streets that followed the contours of the original marsh channels. Timber-framed houses leaned toward each other across lanes barely wide enough for a cart. Parish churches punctuated the urban fabric, the smell of tanning leather mixed with wood smoke and human waste. Then came 1349. The Black Death arrived on a merchant vessel, probably from Bristol. By the time the plague burned itself out, nearly half the townspeople lay in mass graves outside the walls. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was absence. Recovery came slowly, trade resumed, new families rose to replace those extinguished by pestilence. But the walls now held fewer defenders, and the Gaelic lords noticed. They called it black rent. The Cork merchants had another name, extortion. Either way, the transaction was simple. Pay the surrounding Irish chieftains an annual tribute, or watch your cattle disappear, your mills burn, your merchants ambushed on country roads. The city's wealth flowed outward, purchasing not friendship, but temporary forbearance. This was the medieval reality. Prosperity built on isolation, wealth earned through external trade, but taxed by local force. Cork thrived commercially while remaining fundamentally alone, an English-speaking enclave that could see the Irish hills from its ramparts, but never truly controlled them. The walls held, the ships kept sailing, the rent kept getting paid. If exploring these isolated outposts of medieval power interests you, consider becoming a channel member. Your support lets me keep reconstructing these forgotten urban worlds. Now, beyond those medieval walls, a different kind of rebellion was brewing. Between the marsh and the harbour, a new kind of power took root. Not the warriors of old Ireland, not the crown's appointed governors. Merchants, 12 to 15 families who saw opportunity where others saw only water and wool. Their names appeared on cargo manifests bound for Bordeaux, Cadiz, Amsterdam. Wool, tallow, hides, provisions. The city's stone warehouses filled with goods destined for continental tables and workshops. These families controlled the aldermen's seats, the guildmasters' positions, the mayoralty itself. The title had been theirs by royal charter since 1318, but by the 16th century it meant something different. Not merely civic office, but commercial dynasty. Outside the walls, Gaelic lords still ruled the countryside. They wanted their share. Not through conquest, the walls held firm, but through a medieval arrangement the citizens called black rent, protection money paid annually to keep the clans from blockading roads and burning fields. The merchant families paid, business required stability, and stability had its price. The walls they maintained so carefully became a problem in 1690. King James had fled England, William of Orange held London. In Ireland, the question remained open. The city's Jacobite garrison manned the defences that September when the Earl of Marlborough's forces approached. Siege cannon faced medieval stone. The outcome was never in doubt. The garrison surrendered. Cork passed to the Williamite side, its merchant families already calculating the new commercial arrangements. Wars changed dynasties, trade continued. The harbour didn't care which flag flew above the customs house. Through the 18th century, the city's prosperity deepened. Continental demand for Irish provisions grew as Europe's armies and navies expanded. Cork's hides became Spanish leather. Its tallow became French candles. Its wool crossed the Channel despite English attempts to restrict the trade. The merchant families grew wealthy, built townhouses, endowed churches, married their children to other merchant dynasties. Yet something in the city's character refused to settle into comfortable compliance. Perhaps it was the memory of those walls, held against English armies and Irish clans alike. Perhaps it was the contradiction of being an English city that made its fortune trading with England's enemies. The merchants who paid black rent to Gaelic lords, who surrendered to Williamite canons, who shipped provisions to Catholic Europe while swearing oaths to Protestant kings. They were learning a particularly Irish form of pragmatism. Survive, trade, prosper, but never quite submit. The title would come later, crystallized in a phrase, but the spirit was forming here, in warehouses stacked with contraband wool, in ledgers recording both official duties and unofficial arrangements, in a city that bent with every political wind, yet somehow remained itself. Between compliance and rebellion lay a space. Cork's merchants knew how to occupy it. By 1900, the Marsh city had become something its founders couldn't have imagined, Ireland's loudest nationalist voice. The merchants who once swore loyalty to English monarchs now filled assembly rooms with demands for home rule. Their sons joined the Irish Parliamentary Party. Their newspapers printed editorials that made Dublin administrators nervous. When Queen Victoria visited that year, she knighted the mayor, elevating the title Dáil to Lord Mayor, a gesture of imperial affection for a city slipping from the empire's grip. Cork accepted the honour and continued pushing for Irish self-governance. The contradiction troubled no one. This was politics. The harbour still bustled. Beamish and Murphy's breweries sent barrels across the Atlantic. Ships unloaded continental goods at quays stretching toward one of the world's largest natural harbours. But Belfast had overtaken Cork as Ireland's second city. The industrial north was rising. The southern port was holding steady, not growing. Then came 1910, and Cork broke with mainstream nationalism. The city threw its weight behind William O'Brien's All for Ireland party, a dissident movement that believed constitutional politics could still work. O'Brien launched the Cork Free Press to spread his message. For a decade, Cork followed its own political path. The War of Independence shattered any remaining constitutional illusions. Irish guerrillas fought British forces in the streets between the Lees channels. Ambushes, raids, reprisals. The machinery of empire versus men who knew every laneway in the medieval quarter. On the 11th of December 1920, the Blackened Towns set fire to the city centre. The auxiliary police force, recruited from Great War veterans and deployed to crush Irish resistance, moved through Cork after an IRA ambush. They torched buildings systematically. Patrick Street burned, the City Hall burned, shops that had traded for generations became ash. By dawn, the commercial heart lay in ruins. The British called it retaliation. The Irish called it state terrorism. Neither term changes what happened. A European city centre deliberately destroyed by government forces. The smoke hung over the Lee for days. Cork's nickname, Rebel City, earned during the Wars of the Roses, took on new meaning. This wasn't medieval political manoeuvring. This was open conflict between a people and the state claiming to govern them. When the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed in 1921, splitting Ireland and keeping 6 Ulster counties under British rule, Cork rejected it, loudly. Some called Cork the real capital, in contrast to Dublin's acceptance. The joke carried weight. This city had burned for independence. Partition felt like betrayal. The Irish Civil War brought fighting back to the Lee. Anti-treaty forces held Cork until pro-treaty National Army troops attacked from the harbour, using the city's maritime gateway against its defenders. The waterways that made Cork wealthy now delivered Ireland's fratricidal conflict to its docks. The Civil War ended in 1923. Cork lay battered twice over, once by British forces, once by Irishmen fighting Irishmen over the terms of freedom. The City Hall remained a burnt shell for years, a monument to what the struggle had cost. Reconstruction would take decades, the psychological reconstruction longer still. Cork had fought its way to Irish independence and nearly destroyed itself in the process. Between the channels of the Lee, amid the ruins, a question lingered. What does victory look like when your city is ash? The fire that consumed Patrick Street in 1920 hadn't just destroyed buildings. It had burned through a century of Victorian prosperity, through the grand illusion that wealth could insulate a city from history's verdict. When the ashes cooled, Cork faced a question older than its medieval walls: rebuild what was, or imagine what could be. The answer came slowly. In 1936, a new city hall rose where the old one had burned. The stone came from limestone quarries west of the city. The money came from London, a gesture of reconciliation that couldn't undo December 1920, but acknowledged its weight. On the 8th of September, the doors opened. Inside, the council chambers where men had debated home rule now debated drainage systems and housing developments. History hadn't ended. It had simply become municipal administration. Along the docklands, where medieval merchants once counted barrels of salted beef, a different cargo arrived: assembly lines. Ford Motor Company saw opportunity in the harbour city. Henry Ford's grandfather had left West Cork for America decades earlier. Now the family name returned, stamped on cars, built by workers whose fathers had fought in the Civil War, whose grandfathers had survived the famine. The factory hummed through mid-century, a steel promise that the future could be made, not just inherited. But promises don't last forever. 1984, the Ford plant closed. The assembly lines went silent. For a moment it seemed the Marsh City might slip backward, become what it had always threatened to become: a provincial town with grand memories and limited prospects. Instead, something unexpected happened. Where car manufacturing departed, pharmaceutical giants arrived. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis. The harbour that once shipped butter to Europe now produced medications for global markets. In climate-controlled facilities along the Lee, technicians manufactured treatments that would have seemed miraculous to the monks of St. Finbarr's monastery. Among them, a small blue pill that became one of the world's most recognised products. Cork didn't just make Viagra, it owned the absurdity of it, the improbable journey from medieval marsh to pharmaceutical hub. Technology followed. Apple established its European headquarters in the city, employing over 6,000 in manufacturing, research, customer support. The accents of West Cork mixed with software code. Students at University College Cork and Muir Technological University, more than 35,000 of them, studied degrees that didn't exist when the city burned. In 2005, Cork became European Capital of Culture. The Louis Glucksmann Gallery opened at the university the year before, its angular glass standing where stone monasteries once stood. A €60 million school of music followed in 2007. The South Ring Road curved around expanded boundaries. On the 31st of May 2019, the city limits stretched to 187 square kilometres, absorbing suburbs that had grown where farmland once fed walled burghers. The 2022 census counted 224,000 residents. Not the numbers of Dublin or Belfast, but enough to fill concert halls and laboratories, enough to argue in pubs about whether Cork remained Ireland's real capital, enough to preserve the nickname Rebel City, even as the rebellion transformed from gunfire to innovation. The marsh endures. So does the city built upon it. The container ships that slide past the pharmaceutical plants today follow channels carved by monks 14 centuries ago, from marsh to monastery, monastery to Viking port, port to walled city to rebel capital to technology hub. The pattern holds. Cork survives by adapting what others would abandon. The marsh that St. Finbarr chose still shapes the streets. The harbour the Norse traders recognised still draws global commerce. The walls that defined medieval identity still trace invisible boundaries through modern neighbourhoods. The rebel spirit that burned brightest in 1920 still colours local pride. If you walk Patrick Street today, the rebuild hides the ashes. But the ashes shaped what replaced them. Next time, another harbour, another city that refused to die. Where Romans left ruins and Saxons built anew. London, when the river was everything.